Hello again, Pipe Fixer fans. Today's project isn't going to be a project at all, but kind of a concept, a lesson, so to speak, that applies to many pipes, not just one. And it involves stamping on stems, which, as everyone who knows older pipes, it's one of the biggest headaches out there. If you've got a Barling or a Sheraton or any number of older brands where they would take a stamp and impress their company logo on the stem. And it's a different process entirely than getting an imprint on the bowl. Modern day pipe makers very often will take a stamp that they look, this is a flashlight, not a stamp, but these guys will order these stamps and they just come in a shaft about that size and take something like a old billiard ball and drill a hole partway through it and then put that on the top so they can get more hand pressure on it. And they'll put the pipe in a little cradle, and with body weight and strength, I've done it. It's very difficult to do well, but that's how they do that. It is repeatable, and the stamps tend to be curved on kind of like they're hemispherical slightly, so that you can kind of rock them around and get what you want. And they're cut a certain way so that they press into wood and leave a dent, but don't actually cut the fibers. Well, if you try to do that same type of process with a stem stamp, which is one of these little bitty guys, there we go, it doesn't work. Maybe once in 5 tries or something you might get an acceptable result, but you don't want to be messing with that, because by definition you aren't ready to stamp until the stem is finished. So you can trash all your work to that point. It's literally the last thing you do. And you might start over, try again. And that's no good. You want 100% reliability. And these guys are made by companies that make them with little tiny CNC machines. You just send them a super close-up photograph, or best of all, an example. Say, here's a stamp on a stem, send them the stem, and they'll send you back one of these. And they're not inexpensive. The simplest ones run a little over $100, the fanciest ones over $200, and you're going to need a fair number, an array, but that's a different issue. If you're in this, in for a dime, in for a dollar, as a restoration and repair guy, it's something you need to have. So anyhow, that's the strategic situation. And here's the difficulty. Any stem, my usual legal pad here, the catch is when you are stamping it, it needs to rotate. Remember that the stamps are flat and your stem is round. And theoretically, you could have a stamp made for every diameter of stem you're going to stamp, and then it just comes straight down on it and leave the imprint. And that, I suppose they could make them that way if you were willing to buy a $50,000 worth to have an array. But other than that, you're stuck in having to roll the stem, and the smaller its diameter and the larger the imprint, the more rolling action must occur. And that rolling action has to be under pressure. There has to be contact, embedding contact, and still be able to roll it. And that is a vexing problem. I get more questions on this subject than probably any other, because it's such a tough one. So for a moment, pretend the vertical thing here is the stamp and the circular thing is an end view of a stem. Either the stem has to move side to side while it is turning, or it can remain stationary and rotate, and the stamp has to move side to side. There are no other options. It's either or. Well, actually, there's something I'm going to show you in a minute that kind of cheats. But in geometry terms, that's it. You cannot just have a stamp that comes straight down, straight up, and does what you want. It isn't gonna. You'll not find one. Don't waste your time looking. They don't exist. So, rather than talk anymore, I'm going to just show you how this works, and I think it'll make more sense. This is a picture's worth 1,000 words than a movie's worth 1,000,000 words. So here we go. Now remember, you've got to take your own equipment, whatever you might have, and adapt it to the purpose. You don't want to have to buy a whole floor standing arbor press and all that kind of stuff to do this. You could, but that's, few people would choose to do it that way. So you've already got a drill press, most likely, and it will work for this job. Now normally you emphatically don't use a drill press as an arbor type press. You'll damage the gears and stuff, but the imprint pressure on this is well within the range that it's designed to handle when drilling holes. So it's good for that. You don't need a specialized press. You are going to need some way to target the thing. Now I've got an XY table in this clamping device that I've shown in previous videos, and in a minute I'll take the camera off the tripod and kind of hover it around so you can see it from different angles. But this is the same mechanism that I use all the time for cutting tenons and drilling holes and stuff in stems. So this is a chunk of wood. Obviously it's just a section of a door, actually, an exterior door, but I wanted it because it's got nice flat sides and it's strong, and I cut it down to fit precisely between the bolts on this guy so that I can clamp it down. And remember, the way this thing was designed, I can't remember if I talked about it in any detail, but the way this thing functions is this plate here is deliberately loose, and that is not what we want for a stamping operation. So the way to make it into a rigid hole is clamp it tightly on something like that, and now we have a monoblock. That's the real deal. This whole thing here is 800 pounds or something, so it's not going anywhere. And then I take a pair of Delrin rods. I think they're 1/2-inch Delrin, cut to a length that straddles the bolts in here. And they're chosen because they're not frictionless, but they're like Teflon. They're low friction. And they go on each side of that gap. Again, I'll move the camera here in a minute. You can see better. And then this is a piece of PVC pipe, the thick-walled variety. It comes in several flavors, and this is the one that's almost like ceramic. It's really thick-walled for high pressure. Split that right down the center, and then put a notch in each side like so. This about a 1/2 inch down. And in that goes this little carriage. And this widget is where the stem is actually going to go. Now here is a junk stem I found in a box that we're going to stamp, and that rides in there. And then that in turn rides in the PVC. Now this all seems kind of elaborate, but it's not. Once you get this all built, you can put it into action and use it in 2 minutes. You can have a stamp on a stem. So I will affix make sure this is in the right position here, and all that takes is just a piece of tape to hold it. Now that's not going to resist any stamping pressure or anything. That's just to keep it from falling out and when we bump it or nudge it or something like that. And then this guy fits in there, and this has been, the sizes are selected so that the edges of this go into these notches here so that the whole thing turns as a unit and it doesn't slide like that. It'll actually lock them together. And you also want the size of this V thing to touch the bottom of this tube here so that it doesn't compress, split, start widening the tube as you press down to get the impression with the stamp itself. So we get this guy to lock into place like so. It's a little fussy, but it's got to be, yeah, there we go. And it clicks in, and now when this rocks side to side, when you turn this portion, this handle part here, the angle iron, angle aluminum in this case, moves with it. And this whole thing sits between those in like a cradle. So it rocks like that. And it's not, again, frictionless, but it's pretty low friction, which is what you need. Or because if it sticks and you get a jerk or a chatter, you're done. You just messed up your stamping job. So that's the bottom part. And the top part, I already showed you the stamp itself. To that, I've affixed a piece of round aluminum. You can use brass, steel if you want to bother with fabricating it. And the very, very top of the stamp itself has been ground into a ever so slight radius. The reason being, this is actually going to wobble side to side. Now remember back in this case, I said this has to move side to side like so. No can do. We're into fancy industrial machinery with gimbals and mobile cradles, and no can do. You've got to find something at home. And the best way to do that is, rather than have the entire stamp move side to side, is just have the base of it remain rigidly in place, and then it can just wag like the tail on a dog. And this is plastic that's ever so slightly flexible, so that this thing bends, I don't know, 5 degrees maybe, and it self-centers when there's no pressure on it. It's like a spring. So I just looked at the camera, noticed that the time is getting long for a single video, so I'm going to stop it and restart, and we'll actually stamp a stem. Alrighty.